She undressed for a medical exam and froze in shock when she saw who the doctor was. Hello, let's start another beautiful story. Welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let's go. Emma Carter stood before the glass doors of Riverside Medical Center, her reflection fragmenting in the morning sunlight. The building's modern facade stretched upward, its windows catching the golden hour glow of Boston's skyline. She checked. Her watch, 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes early for her first checkup in what felt like decades. Inside her leather briefcase, her phone buzzed for the third time that morning. Another crisis at the office, no doubt. As Senior VP of Marketing at Davidson & Associates, she'd mastered the art of putting out fires before her first cup of coffee. But today was different. Today, she'd finally listened to her assistant's persistent reminders about prioritizing her health. "Just this once," she muttered, silencing her phone as she pushed through the revolving doors into the air-conditioned lobby. The interior was exactly what she expected from a high-end medical facility. Pristine white walls, designer, furniture in muted grays, and the faint scent of lavender attempting to mask the sterile hospital smell. A large abstract painting dominated the reception area, its swirls of blue and white reminiscent of crashing waves. "Miss Carter?" The receptionist smiled warmly. "You can fill these out while you wait." She handed over a clipboard with several forms attached. Emma settled into one of the sleek chairs, crossing her legs and balancing the clipboard on her knee. The questionnaire was routine: medical history, family background, current medications. Her pen hovered over the emergency in contact section. After a moment's hesitation, she wrote down her younger sister Lauren's information. The waiting room television murmured in the background, broadcasting a morning show segment about stress management. Emma almost laughed at the irony. Her entire life was a masterclass in stress management, wasn't it? Running a department of 30 people, juggling million-dollar campaigns, maintaining her position in a male-dominated industry, all while pretending she didn't notice the pitying looks from relatives at family gatherings when they asked about her personal life. Emma Carter, a nurse in pale blue scrubs, appeared at the doorway, holding another clipboard. Following the nurse down the hallway, Emma's heels clicked against the polished floor, echoing in the quiet corridor. The sound reminded her of late nights at the office, when she was often the last one there, her footsteps the only sound in the empty building. "Right in here," the nurse gestured to exam room 3. "Please change into this gown. Dr. Sullivan will be with you shortly." Emma nodded, already reaching for her blazer buttons before the door closed. The paper gown crinkled as she put it on, the material thin and uncomfortable against her skin. She sat on the examination table, the paper covering crinkling beneath her. The wall clock ticked steadily, marking each second in the quiet room. Her eyes wandered over the anatomical charts on the walls, the neatly arranged medical instruments, the small window offering a slice of sky between neighboring buildings. Everything was ordered, predictable, sterile, just the way she liked. Her life now, no surprises, no complications, no... The door opened. Time didn't stop, the world didn't slow down. But in that moment, as her eyes met his, Emma felt 20 years collapse into a single heartbeat. Nathan Sullivan stood in the doorway, exactly the same and completely different. The boyish charm she remembered had matured into distinguished features, his dark hair now threaded with silver at the temples. He wore a white coat over a crisp blue shirt, a stethoscope draped around his neck. His hands, those hands she once knew so well, gripped a tablet, knuckles white with tension. "Hello, Emma." His voice was steady, professional, but she caught the slight tremor in it, the way his throat worked as he swallowed. The room suddenly felt too small, too warm, too real. Emma's carefully constructed world of boardrooms and business strategies crumbled around her, leaving her exposed in more ways than just the thin paper gown. "Nathan." Her own voice sounded distant, as if someone else was speaking. "I didn't—" She stopped, unsure what to say. "I didn't know you were here. I didn't expect to ever see you again. I didn't think you could still affect me like this." He cleared his throat, taking a step into the room. "I'll be conducting your examination today." His eyes flickered to the tablet, a shield between them. "It's been a while since your last checkup." Emma wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all. A while. Yes, it had been a while since her last checkup. It had been a while since she'd allowed herself to think about him. It had been a while since that morning 20 years ago, when she'd found his letter, its crisp folds containing words that had shattered her world. And now here he was, about to check her heart rate when he'd been the one to stop it all those years ago. The universe, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor. The blood pressure cuff tightened around Emma's arm, each squeeze a reminder of her thundering pulse. Nathan's movements were precise, clinical, a carefully choreographed dance of professional distance. But his fingers trembled slightly as he pressed the stethoscope to her arm, and Emma noticed. She always noticed the little things about him. Even after 20 years, that hadn't changed. 120/80, he murmured, more to himself than to her. He made a note on his tablet, his eyes fixed on the screen. "Your pressure's a bit elevated." "I wonder why," Emma said, unable to keep the edge from her voice. The words hung between them, sharp and accusatory. Nathan's pen stilled. For a moment neither of them moved. The soft hum of the building's ventilation system filled the silence, punctuated by the muffled sounds of footsteps in the hallway outside. "Emma," he started, then stopped, as if the weight of 2 decades had stolen whatever words he'd planned to say. "Don't." She held up her hand. "Just do the examination. That's what we're here for, right?" She forced a smile that felt more like a grimace. "I have a board meeting at 11. He nodded, accepting her retreat into professional courtesy. "I need to check your heart rate." Another pause. "Would you mind lying back?" Emma complied, the paper crinkling beneath her as she reclined on the examination table. The ceiling tiles above were spotted with age, and she focused on counting them, trying to ignore the warmth of Nathan's hands as he pressed the stethoscope to her chest. "Breathe deeply," he instructed. She inhaled, and with the breath came the faint scent of his aftershave, different from what he used to wear but somehow still familiar. A memory surfaced, morning light streaming through dorm room windows, his cologne on her pillow, the weight of his medical textbooks on her desk. She pushed it away. "Your heart rate's elevated too." His voice was softer now, less clinical. "That tends to happen," Emma said, sitting up abruptly, "when you're ambushed by ghosts." Nathan stepped back, running a hand through his hair. A gesture so achingly familiar it made her chest hurt. "I should have said something when I saw your name on my patient list. I could have had another doctor take over." "Why didn't you?" The question surprised them both. Emma hadn't meant to ask it, just as she hadn't meant to notice how the years had refined his features, adding character lines around his eyes and mouth that made him look more distinguished, more real. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe. I thought maybe I needed to face this, face you." Emma's laugh was hollow. "Face me. After 20 years of silence, you decide that a routine physical is the perfect time for closure?" "No, He set down his tablet, finally meeting her, eyes directly. "I've thought about you, often, especially when I came back to Boston 5 years ago. I drove past your old house once, but what?" The anger she'd thought long buried surfaced, hot and sudden. "You couldn't bring yourself to knock on a door, Write a letter. God knows you were good at those. Nathan flinched. I deserved that. You deserved a lot of things, Nathan. An explanation would have been nice. A goodbye that wasn't scribbled on paper and left on my dresser while I slept. Emma stood, gathering her composure like armor. But we were kids then. Ancient history now. Is it? His question was quiet, almost lost in the ambient noise of the clinic. Before Emma could respond, her phone buzzed loudly from her briefcase. She reached for it gratefully, using the interruption to rebuild her walls. "Lauren, what's wrong?" Her sister's voice was frantic. Dad's in the hospital. He collapsed during his morning walk. They're saying it might be his heart. The phone nearly slipped from Emma's suddenly numb fingers. She was vaguely aware of Nathan watching her, his expression shifting from guarded to concerned. "Which hospital?" she managed to ask, her voice surprisingly steady. "Massachusetts General. I'm scared. He's asking for you." "I'm on my way." Emma ended the call, her hands shaking as she reached for her clothes. "I need to go." "Emma, wait." Nathan stepped forward. "Let me help. Mass General is my primary hospital. I can—" "No." She cut him off, already buttoning her blouse with trembling fingers. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to walk back into my life and play hero. Not now." But as she grabbed her briefcase and headed for the door, his voice stopped her. "Your father, Robert Carter, isn't it? He's likely being treated in the cardiac unit. I know the head of cardiology there. Let me make a call, please." Emma stood frozen, her hand on the doorknob. The universe's sense of humor was getting darker by the minute. She thought of her father, strong, vibrant, the man who had held her together after Nathan left, lying in a hospital bed. Pride warred with practicality. Finally, without turning around, she nodded once. "Make the call." "But Nathan—" She glanced back at him. "This doesn't change anything." As she strode down the hallway, her heels clicking against the floor with military precision, Emma realized her hands were still shaking, and she wasn't sure if it was from fear for her father or from the way Nathan had looked at her, like he was seeing both who she had been and who she had become, and finding himself lost somewhere in between. The fluorescent lights of Massachusetts General Hospital cast harsh shadows across Emma's face as she rushed through the emergency department. Lauren was waiting by the elevators, her younger sister's usual polished appearance disheveled, dark circles under her eyes, suggesting she'd been here for hours. "Fourth floor," Lauren said, pulling Emma into a quick embrace. "They're running tests. Mom's with him now." As the elevator doors closed, Emma noticed her reflection in the metallic surface. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the strain around her eyes, the way her shoulders hunched forward under the weight of worry. She straightened her spine, an old habit of presenting strength even when she felt anything but strong. "The Dr. Nathan called ahead," Lauren mentioned, watching the floor numbers climb. "Dr. Reeves? She's supposedly one of the best cardiologists. In Boston? How did you manage that connection?" Emma's throat tightened. Long story. The cardiac unit was quieter than the emergency department, but the underlying tension was palpable. Their mother, Patricia Carter, stood outside room 412, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her hands clasped tightly together. 20 years of teaching elementary school had given her an eternal air of calm authority, but Emma could see the fear beneath the composure. "They're doing an echocardiogram," Patricia explained, embracing each daughter in turn. "Dr. Reeves thinks it might be arterial blockage. They're talking about possible surgery." Emma's world tilted slightly. Surgery. The word hung in the air like a threat. "Mrs. Carter," a nurse appeared with a clipboard, "we need some additional family history. Could you—" "I'll go," Patricia said, squeezing Emma's hand before following the nurse. Through the room's window, Emma could see her father lying still, on the hospital bed, wires and monitors creating a technological cocoon around him. Robert Carter had always seemed larger than life, the kind of father who built tree houses, coached Little League, and never missed a dance recital. Now he looked smaller, vulnerable in the hospital gown. "He was asking for you earlier," Lauren said softly. "Before they gave him the sedative, he kept saying he needed to tell you something important." Emma pressed her hand against the cool glass. "Did he say what?" "No, but—" Lauren hesitated. "He mentioned Nathan's name." The world seemed to stop for a moment. Emma turned to her sister, but before she could respond, a familiar voice came from down the hallway. "Emma." Nathan stood there in his white coat, a different one from earlier. He must have come directly from Riverside. He held a tablet and several folders, his professional demeanor firmly in place, but his eyes held something more personal when they met hers. "What are you doing here?" Emma demanded, even as part of her already knew the answer. "Dr. Reeves asked me to consult." He stepped closer, nodding a greeting to Lauren. "I specialize in certain cardiac procedures she's considering for your father." Lauren looked between them, her expression shifting from confusion to sudden understanding. "Wait, is this the Nathan from college?" "Lauren," Emma warned, but her sister had already extended her hand. "I was 12 when you disappeared," Lauren said, her tone carrying an edge despite her smile. "Emma cried for weeks. I always wondered what kind of man could do that to my sister." "Lauren, please." Emma's voice cracked slightly. "This isn't the time." Nathan accepted Lauren's words with a slight nod, his face showing the impact of each one. "You're right, I was a coward. But right now, I'm here as a doctor, and your father needs the best care we can provide." He opened one of the folders, spreading out several images, X-rays, and scan results. "The arterial blockage is significant, but there's a newer, less invasive procedure we could consider. Dr. Reeves and I have had success with it in similar cases." Emma found herself drawn closer, studying the medical images, though they meant little to her. Nathan's shoulder nearly touched hers as he pointed out various details, and she could feel the warmth radiating from him, achingly familiar even after all these years. "The recovery time is shorter," he continued, his voice professional, but gentle. "Less risk of complications, but we'd need to act quickly." "Why you?" Emma asked, finally voicing the question that had been burning inside her. Of all the cardiac specialists in Boston, why did it have to be you? Nathan met her gaze steadily. "Because I'm the best at this particular procedure. And because, whatever happened between us, I owe your father this much. He was kind to me, Emma. When I was just a scholarship kid with big dreams and empty pockets, he treated me like a son." The memory hit Emma hard. Her father helping Nathan study for his MCATs, offering encouragement when Nathan's own father had only offered criticism. How many Sunday dinners had Nathan spent at their table? How many times had her father clapped him on the back and said, "You'll make a fine doctor someday, son"? A nurse appeared in the doorway of Robert's room. "Dr. Sullivan, he's awake." Emma watched as Nathan transformed, his demeanor shifting fully into doctor mode. He moved past her toward the room, then paused. "I know you don't trust me," he said quietly, "but trust that I remember everything your family did for me. Trust that I won't let anything happen to him." As he disappeared into the room, Lauren squeezed Emma's hand. "You okay?" Emma stared through the window, watching as Nathan bent over. Their father's bed, his manner both professional and caring. 20 years ago, she had imagined a future where Nathan would truly be part of their family. Now here he was, holding her father's life in his hands. "I have to be," she whispered, and wasn't sure if she meant okay or strong or simply present in this moment where past and present collided with such force that she could barely breathe. The hospital cafeteria buzzed with muted conversations and the clinking of utensils against plates. Emma stared into her untouched coffee, watching the steam spiral upward. Across the table, Dr. Andrea Reeves spread out her father's test results, like a complicated hand of cards. "The procedure Dr. Sullivan suggested is our best option," Dr. Reeves explained. Her silver-streaked hair caught in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the cafeteria windows. "I've worked with Nathan for 5 years now. His success rate with this technique is remarkable." Emma's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. "And there's absolutely no one else who can perform it." Dr. Reeves paused, studying Emma with knowing eyes. "There are other capable surgeons, yes, but Nathan pioneered this particular approach. He actually developed it during his fellowship at Mayo Clinic." She hesitated, then added, "It was part of his own recovery process." "His recovery?" The words slipped out before Emma could stop them. "I probably shouldn't," Dr. Reeves started, then sighed. "Look, I don't know what happened between you two, but I do know Nathan was seriously ill during his early 20s. He nearly died. The experience changed him, shaped his entire approach to medicine." The coffee cup trembled in Emma's hands. 20 years ago, during his early 20s. The timing aligned perfectly with when he disappeared. "He never told me," Emma whispered, more to herself than to Dr. Reeves. "Nathan's very private about that period of his life," Dr. Reeves said gently. "I only know because I was one of his treating physicians at Mayo." She gathered up the test results, her movements deliberate. "The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Nathan will want to discuss the details with your family this evening." Emma nodded mechanically, her mind still processing this new information. As Dr. Reeves left, Lauren slid into the vacant seat, placing a sandwich in front of Emma. "Eat something," her sister insisted. "You've been running on coffee and anxiety all day." "Did you know," Emma asked abruptly, "about Nathan being sick?" Lauren shook her head. "No, but I remember Dad acting strange after Nathan left. He'd get these phone calls that made him look worried. Mom once asked him if he'd heard any news about the boy, and Dad just said it wasn't his story to tell." They knew, Emma realized, the pieces starting to fit together. "Mom and Dad knew why he left, and they never told me." "Maybe they couldn't," Lauren suggested. "Maybe they promised—" "Don't defend them." Emma pushed away from the table, needing to move. 2 decades of watching me wonder what I did wrong, what made him leave, and they knew the whole time. She strode toward the floor-to-ceiling, windows pressing her forehead against the cool glass. Below, Boston stretched out in the late afternoon light, the Charles River a ribbon of gold in the distance. How many times had she and Nathan walked along that river, planning their future? How many promises had they made, never knowing that illness would shatter them all? "Emma!" Nathan's voice came from behind her. She could see his reflection in the window, still in his white coat, looking uncertain whether to approach. "We need to discuss the surgery details with your father." She turned to face him, really looking at him now. Were there signs she'd missed earlier? The slight pallor beneath his tan, the way he sometimes seemed to measure his movements as if conserving energy. "Were you ever going to tell me?" she asked. Nathan's expression shifted, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Andrea told you. Not everything, just enough to make 20 years of questions multiply." Emma stepped closer to him, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "You were sick, dying maybe, and you chose to face that alone, rather than tell me." "I was 22, he said quietly. "They gave me 6 months to live. What was I supposed to do? Ask you to watch me die? Let you throw away your dreams to play nurse? That wasn't your decision to make." "No?" His voice rose slightly. "You had just been accepted to Harvard Business School. Your whole future was ahead of you. I saw how you looked at me, Emma. If I'd told you, you would have deferred your admission. Moved to Minnesota with me. Spent your days in hospital waiting rooms instead of classrooms. You're right, Emma said, her voice breaking. I would have, because that's what you do when you love someone. You show up, you stay, you fight together. The words hung between them, the use of present tense not lost on either of them. In the distance, a hospital PA system called for a doctor, the sound muffled through the cafeteria walls. Your father's waiting, Nathan finally said, his professional mask slipping back into place. We should... Right! Emma smoothed her skirt, rebuilding her own walls. The surgery. That's what matters now. As they walked toward the elevator, maintaining a careful distance between them, Emma caught sight of their reflection in the polished doors. A successful executive and a respected surgeon, both carrying the weight of what might have been. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. As they stepped inside, Nathan pressed the button for the cardiac floor, his hand trembling slightly. I survived, he said suddenly, still facing the doors. But I didn't know I would. Not then. The letter. It was the hardest thing I've ever written. Emma watched the floor numbers climb. And afterward? When you knew you would live? By then, he said softly, I thought I'd lost the right to come back. The elevator doors opened to the cardiac unit, where her family waited to discuss her father's surgery. But for a moment, neither of them moved, caught in the gravity of truths finally spoken, and the crushing weight of choices that could never be unmade. The night before her father's surgery, Emma found herself alone in his hospital room. Lauren had taken their mother home to rest, promising to return early the next morning. The machines beeped steadily in the darkness, their rhythmic sounds matching the rise and fall of her father's chest. Robert Carter opened his eyes, more alert now that they'd adjusted his medication. You should go home too, sunshine. Get some sleep. I'm fine here, Emma said, adjusting his blanket. A habit from childhood. Her father had always tucked her in, and now their roles were reversed. Still stubborn as ever. He smiled weakly, just like when you were little and wouldn't leave that treehouse until I promised to add a second story. Which you did, Emma returned his smile. You never could say no to me. Except once. His voice grew serious. When Nathan asked me not to tell you. The room suddenly felt airless. Emma gripped the metal railing of the hospital bed, steadying herself. You knew. All this time, you knew why he left. Robert's eyes filled with tears. He called me from Mayo Clinic about a week after he disappeared. Said he'd been diagnosed months earlier but kept it secret. He was starting an experimental treatment, his only chance, they told him. Why didn't you tell me? Emma's voice cracked. Do you know how long I blame myself? How many nights I lay awake wondering what I did wrong? He made me promise. Robert reached for her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. Said if you knew he was sick, you'd throw everything away to be with him. And he was right, wasn't he? You would have. That should have been my choice. You were so young, both of you. Robert's voice grew softer. He called me every few weeks during his treatment. Sometimes he was so weak he could barely talk. Every time he'd ask about you, whether you'd started business school, if you were happy. Emma sank into the chair beside the bed, her legs no longer able to support her. Did you tell him about me? Some things. That you were excelling at. Harvard! That you'd gotten that internship you wanted. He paused. That you dated William Preston for a while. Dad. He needed to know you were living your life, Robert said firmly. It helped him fight harder, knowing you were achieving your dreams. Emma remembered those early Harvard days, throwing herself into her studies, building a perfect future while trying to forget the past. She dated William because he was nothing like Nathan, pragmatic, predictable, safe. It hadn't lasted. After his recovery, she said slowly, Why didn't you tell me then? Robert was quiet for a long moment. Because by then, you'd built walls so high even I couldn't see over them sometimes. You were determined to be independent, untouchable. I thought bringing up Nathan might break something in you that had just started to heal. The truth of his words hit her hard. She had built those walls carefully, brick by brick, year after year. Her success in the corporate world was partly due to that emotional fortress. Nothing could hurt her because nothing could reach her. A knock at the door interrupted them. Nathan stood in the doorway, his white coat exchanged for casual clothes, dark jeans and a grey sweater that made him look more like the boy she'd known than the doctor he'd become. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said. "I wanted to check Mr. Carter's latest readings before heading home." "Robert," her father corrected, "after all these years, and what we've been through, I think you can still call me Robert." Emma watched as Nathan moved around the room, checking monitors with practiced efficiency. The domesticity of the scene, her father in bed, Nathan by his side, her watching from her chair, felt like an echo of what might have been. "Everything looks stable," Nathan said, making notes on his tablet. "The surgery's scheduled for 8 a.m. Try to get some rest, both of you." "Nathan," Robert's voice stopped him at the door. "Remember what we talked about telling her." Nathan's shoulders tensed. "Robert, I don't think she deserves to know everything." Robert's tone was gentle but firm. Not just about the illness, about what happened after. Emma looked between them, confused. "What are you talking about?" Nathan turned back, his expression conflicted. "Your father, he did more than just take my calls during my treatment. He helped pay for it." "What?" Emma stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. "The experimental treatment wasn't covered by insurance," Nathan explained, his voice rough. "Your father found out, and he took out a second mortgage on the house, sent me the money anonymously through the hospital. I didn't know until months later, when I was stronger and traced the payments." Emma stared at her father in disbelief. "The renovation project, when you and Mom redid the entire first floor. That wasn't really about updating the house, was it?" "We needed a reason for the loan," Robert said simply. "Your mother agreed immediately. She'd always thought of Nathan as a son." The weight of 20 years of secrets pressed down on Emma's chest. Her parents had remortgaged their home to save the man who broke her heart, and Nathan, he'd carried not only the burden of his illness, but also the knowledge of their sacrifice. "I paid it back," Nathan said quickly. "Every cent, with interest, as soon as I could. But the debt I owe your family, that I can never repay." Emma sank back into her chair, overwhelmed. Everything she thought she knew about the past was shifting, revealing layers of love, sacrifice, and unspoken bonds that had continued long after she thought all connections were severed. "Get some rest," Nathan repeated softly. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." As he left, Emma looked at her father, this man who had always been her hero, but whose capacity for love was still surprising her. "Why didn't you ever tell me any of this?" Robert's eyes were already closing, the medication making him drowsy. "Sometimes, sunshine, love means carrying burdens so others don't have to. Sometimes it means letting go of the very person you're trying to save." Emma sat in the darkness long after her father fell asleep, thinking about different kinds of love. The passionate love of youth that she'd shared with Nathan, the sacrificial love her parents had shown, and the quiet, enduring love that could survive decades of silence and secrets. Outside the window, Boston's lights twinkled like stars fallen to earth, and Emma wondered if some bonds, once formed, could never truly be broken. Only transformed, like light changing its shape, but never losing its essence. Dawn crept over Boston, painting Massachusetts General in shades of gold and rose. Emma stood at the window of the surgical waiting room, her third cup of coffee growing cold in her hands. She'd changed from yesterday's work clothes into fresh attire Lauren had brought her, a soft grey sweater and black pants that felt like armor against the morning's challenges. "He's in pre-op now," Dr. Reeves announced, approaching with Nathan beside her. They were both in surgical scrubs, their movements precise with pre-operation focus. "We'll begin in 20 minutes. Emma nodded, unable to take her eyes off Nathan. He looked different in surgical garb, younger somehow, more like the medical student who'd once spread his textbooks across her dorm room floor. His hands, those skilled surgeon's hands that would soon hold her father's heart, were steady as he reviewed the final charts. Lauren appeared with their mother, who had spent the last hour in the hospital chapel. Patricia Carter's face was composed, but her rosary beads clicked softly between her fingers, a nervous habit Emma hadn't seen since her grandmother's funeral. "Nathan." Patricia stepped forward, touching his arm. "Before you go in." "Mrs. Carter," he started, but she shook her head. "Patricia, please." She squeezed his arm. "I just wanted to say, when Robert and I helped with your treatment, it wasn't just because you were Emma's boyfriend. It was because you were family. You still are." Nathan's professional facade cracked slightly. "I don't deserve—" "Family isn't about deserving," Patricia interrupted, her teacher's voice brooking no argument. "It's about belonging, about showing up when it matters." She pressed something into his hand, a small silver medallion. "Robert's carried this St. Luke medal since his first day of teaching. He'd want you to have it today." Emma watched as Nathan's fingers closed around the medal, his throat working. St. Luke, patron saint of physicians. How many times had she seen that medallion on her father's desk? How many students had Robert Carter mentored, inspired, guided toward their dreams? "Dr. Sullivan?" A surgical nurse appeared. "We're ready." The moment stretched, heavy with unspoken words. Then Nathan straightened, slipping the medallion into his pocket. "I'll take good care of him," he promised, his eyes meeting Emma's. "Nathan!" Emma called as he turned to leave. The words stuck in her throat. What could she say? "Good luck? I trust you. I understand now why you left, but I still don't know how to forgive you." He seemed to read it all in her face. "I know," he said softly. Then he was gone, following Dr. Reeves through the double doors that led to the operating room. The waiting began. Lauren tried to work on her laptop, answering emails from her PR firm. Patricia alternated between prayer and meticulously organizing the contents of her purse. Emma paced, her heels clicking against the floor, in a rhythm that matched her racing thoughts. Memories surfaced unbidden. Her father teaching her to ride a bike, his strong hands steady on the seat until she found her balance. Nathan and her father discussing medical ethics over Sunday dinner, their debates continuing long after the plates were cleared. The look on Robert's face when she'd received her Harvard acceptance letter, pride mingled with something else she now recognized as grief, knowing what that achievement had cost Nathan. "He'll be fine," Lauren said, closing her laptop. "Nathan won't let anything happen to him." "How can you be so sure?" Emma stopped pacing. 20 years ago, Nathan made a choice that broke all our hearts. How do we know he won't? "Because he's not that scared 22-year-old anymore," Patricia interjected, her voice firm. "And neither are you that heartbroken girl." Before Emma could respond, her phone buzzed, a text from her assistant. "Board asking about Q3 projections, conference call in 30 mins." Emma stared at the message, the corporate world suddenly feeling distant and meaningless. She typed back, "Family emergency, reschedule." "I did the same thing," Lauren said, watching her. "Cancelled everything. Some things matter more than work." "Nathan knew that," Patricia added quietly. "When he left, he knew your career mattered more than his need for you." "Mom." "No, listen to me." Patricia set down her rosary. "When he called to tell your father about his diagnosis, do you know what he said? He said, 'I won't be the reason she gives up her dreams.'" He loved you enough to let you go. Emma sank into a chair, her legs suddenly weak, and Dad loved him enough to save him. Love takes many forms, Patricia said, taking Emma's hand. Sometimes it's grand gestures and dramatic sacrifices. Sometimes it's simply showing up, day after day, choosing to be present even when it hurts. The surgery would take hours. As morning stretched into afternoon, Emma thought about presence and absence, about choices made in youth that echoed through decades. She thought about Nathan, standing over her father in the operating room, his hands guided by years of experience, born from his own brush with mortality. A memory surfaced, Nathan at 22, his face serious as he told her his plans to specialize in cardiology. "The heart is amazing," he'd said. "It can break and heal, and somehow keep beating." Now, waiting for news about her father's heart, Emma wondered if Nathan had been talking about more than just anatomy. Perhaps he'd understood even then that hearts, both physical and metaphorical, had an extraordinary capacity for resilience. The medallion of St. Luke lay in Nathan's pocket, carrying 2 decades of her father's prayers. And somewhere beyond the operating room doors, Nathan's hands worked with precision and care, trying to heal not just a failing heart, but perhaps something more, a connection that, despite everything, had never fully severed. 6 hours into the surgery, Dr. Reeves emerged from the operating room. Her surgical cap was damp with sweat, but her eyes were bright. Emma, Lauren, and Patricia rose as one, their faces etched with hours of worry. "The surgery was successful," Dr. Reeves announced, and the collective exhale of relief seemed to change the pressure in the room. Dr. Sullivan's technique worked perfectly. "Robert is being moved to recovery now." Patricia's rosary beads clattered to the floor as she covered her face with her hands. Lauren wrapped an arm around her mother's shoulders, tears streaming down both their faces. But Emma remained frozen, processing the words that had just rewritten her worst fears into hope. "Can we see him?" Lauren asked. "Soon. He'll be groggy from the anesthesia, but—" Dr. Reeves paused as Nathan appeared behind her, still in his surgical scrubs. He looked exhausted, his face drawn, but there was a quiet satisfaction in his stance. "The next 24 hours are critical," he said, his voice hoarse from hours of concentration. "But his vital signs are strong. The arterial flow has been restored and—" He stopped, swaying slightly. Emma moved without thinking, catching his arm. "When was the last time you ate?" Nathan blinked, as if the question was too complex to process. Yesterday, maybe." "Andrea," Emma turned to Dr. Reeves, "can you take Mom and Lauren to see Dad? I need to make sure this one doesn't become your next patient." Dr. Reeves nodded, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "Take him to the doctor's lounge on the 3rd floor. There's a decent coffee machine and some actual food." The elevator ride was silent. Nathan leaned against the wall, his eyes closed, while Emma watched his reflection in the polished doors. The confident surgeon was gone, replaced by a man who'd just spent 6 hours holding her father's life in his hands. The doctor's lounge was mercifully empty. Emma guided Nathan to a leather armchair while she raided the small kitchen area, returning with a sandwich, an apple, and a large coffee. "Eat," she commanded, setting the food in front of him. "Doctor's orders." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "You're not that kind of doctor." "No, I'm the kind who makes million-dollar decisions over lunch meetings. Trust me, I know about skipping meals for the job." Nathan took a bite of the sandwich, and some color began returning to his face. Emma settled into the chair opposite him, studying him openly now. His hands, she noticed, were completely steady, despite his exhaustion, the mark of a surgeon who'd learned to control every muscle, every movement. "You did it," she said softly. "We did it," he corrected. Your father's strong, and having you all there. He reached into his pocket, pulling out the St. Luke medallion. This helped too. Dad's had that medallion since before I was born. It's seen him through every major moment of his life. I know. Nathan turned the silver disc over in his hands. He showed it to me once, when I was struggling with organic chemistry. Told me that faith wasn't just about believing in God. It was about believing in yourself and the people who believe in you. Emma watched as he carefully placed the medallion on the table between them. You could have told him no, she said. When they asked you to do the surgery, you could have recommended another surgeon. No, I couldn't. Nathan met her eyes. Just like you couldn't walk away when he needed you. Some bonds, he trailed off, searching for words. Some bonds never break, Emma finished. They just change shape. The weight of 20 years hung between them, not as a wall now, but as a bridge. Each painful moment, each secret kept, each sacrifice made, forming its foundations. I used to dream about you, Nathan said suddenly. During the treatment. Fever dreams mostly. You were always running toward me, but I kept getting further away. I'd wake up feeling like I'd lost you all over again. Emma's throat tightened. I used to dream about you too, for years. In my dreams, you always came back with a different excuse, but I never imagined. She gestured at their surroundings, at his surgical scrubs, at the reality they now inhabited. Life has a way of writing stories we'd never dare to imagine. He finished the sandwich and reached for the coffee. When I was sick, one of my nurses told me something I've never forgotten. She said that healing isn't just about fixing what's broken. It's about learning to live with the scars in a way that makes you stronger. Is that what you did? Learned to live with the scars? I tried. His voice was quiet. But some scars remind you of what you lost, what you gave up. They don't make you stronger, they just make you more careful. A knock at the door interrupted them. Lauren stood in the doorway, her face glowing. Dad's awake. He's asking for both of you. Emma and Nathan exchanged glances. Both of you. Not just his daughter, but also the man who'd saved his life, the boy he'd helped save 2 decades ago. Ready? Emma asked, standing. Nathan picked up the St. Luke medallion, holding it out to her. Their fingers brushed as she took it, and for a moment Emma felt the electric current of their shared past, their complicated present, and their uncertain future. Ready, he said, and somehow she knew he was answering more than just her simple question. As they walked toward Robert's recovery room, their steps falling naturally in sync, Emma thought about scars, the ones that marked her father's chest now, the invisible ones that had shaped Nathan's life, and the ones she carried in her own heart. Maybe the nurse had been right. Maybe healing wasn't about erasing the scars, but about understanding the story they told. The days following Robert's surgery fell into a peculiar rhythm. Emma worked remotely from the hospital, her laptop balanced on her knees as she alternated between quarterly reports and monitoring her father's vital signs. Lauren coordinated with their mother, ensuring someone was always present, while Patricia kept up a steady stream of optimism that somehow managed not to feel forced. And then there was Nathan. He appeared multiple times daily, his visits extending well beyond what was professionally necessary. Sometimes he came in his white coat, clipboard in hand, speaking in careful medical terms about recovery trajectories and medication adjustments. Other times, he arrived in casual clothes during his breaks, pulling up a chair to discuss baseball statistics with Robert or share medical school stories that somehow had never come up 2 decades ago. It was during one of these informal visits that Emma returned from the cafeteria to find Nathan and her father in deep conversation, their voices low and serious. "Never forgave myself for that," Nathan was saying. "The way I left." "The past has a way of working itself out," Robert replied, his voice stronger than it had been since the surgery. "Look where we are now." Emma cleared her throat, announcing her presence. Both men looked up, and she caught the flash of something unspoken passing between them before Nathan stood, straightening his sweater. "Your father's numbers are looking better every day," he said, slipping back into doctor mode. "The new medication seems to be working well." "Thanks to you," Robert added with pointed emphasis. An awkward silence fell, heavy with unspoken words. Emma busied herself arranging the fresh flowers Lauren had brought that morning, while Nathan gathered his things with methodical precision. "I have a consultation," he said finally, "but I'll stop by later to check on things." As he passed Emma, his arm brushed hers, a seemingly accidental touch that sent electricity through her skin. She waited until his footsteps faded down the hallway before turning to her father. "Want to tell me what that was about?" Robert adjusted his position in the bed, wincing slightly. "Just clearing the air. 20 years is a long time to carry guilt." "Dad, he showed me his medical records," Robert continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "From Mayo Clinic, the experimental treatment had a 12% success rate." 12%, Emma. He was 22 years old, facing odds that would terrify men twice his age. Emma sank into the chair Nathan had vacated, its warmth a ghost of his presence. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you need to understand. He didn't just leave to protect your dreams. He left because he couldn't bear the thought of you watching him die." Robert reached for her hand. "He knew you, Sunshine. Knew you'd never give up, never stop fighting, even when there was no hope left. He wanted to spare you that pain." "By causing a different kind of pain?" The words came out sharper than she intended. "Sometimes we make impossible choices to protect the people we love." Robert's voice softened. "Like when your mother and I chose not to tell you about helping with his treatment. We thought we were protecting you too." Emma stood abruptly, moving to the window. Boston sprawled before her, the afternoon sun glinting off glass buildings. Somewhere out there was her office, her carefully constructed life, all the successes she'd built on the foundation of that long-ago heartbreak. "I saw him, you know," Robert said quietly. "Once, during his treatment. Your mother and I flew out to Mayo during spring break, told you we were visiting your aunt in Florida." Emma turned, stunned. "What?" "He was so thin, barely able to walk. But the first thing he asked about was you, whether you were happy at Harvard, if you were taking care of yourself." Robert's eyes grew distant with memory. "He made us promise not to tell you we'd seen him, said he couldn't bear the thought of you remembering him that way." A noise in the doorway made them both look up. Lauren stood there, arms full of paper, bags that smelled of Italian food. "I come bearing real food," she announced, then paused, reading the room. "Should I come back?" "No," Emma said quickly, grateful for the interruption. "I'm starving." They spread the food across the rolling table, the familiar ritual of sharing a meal bringing a semblance of normalcy to the sterile hospital room. Lauren had brought Robert's favorite lasagna from the North End restaurant they'd frequented during family celebrations. "I ran into Nathan in the elevator," Lauren mentioned casually, too casually. "He looks different when he smiles, younger." Emma concentrated on her salad, ignoring her sister's pointed look. "He has a lot to smile about. The surgery was successful." "That's not what I meant, and you know it." Lauren lowered her voice, though Robert had dozed off after a few bites of lasagna. "I've seen how he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching. It's the same way he used to look at you in college." "Lauren, don't." "Why not? You're both different people now. Older, hopefully wiser, and he's not sick anymore." "No," Emma agreed, her fork pushing pasta around her plate. "Now he's just the brilliant surgeon who saved Dad's life. The man who chose to disappear rather than let me help him fight. The person who—" She stopped, closing her eyes. The person who still knows exactly how I take my coffee, who still remembers Dad's favorite baseball stats, who still makes me feel like that 20-year-old girl who thought she had everything figured out. Lauren reached across the table, squeezing her sister's hand. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe sometimes we need to remember who we were to figure out who we can become. Outside, a helicopter landed on the hospital's helipad, its rhythmic beating like a giant heart pulsing against the sky. Emma watched its blades slow to a stop, thinking about momentum and inertia, about the physics of objects in motion and hearts at rest. "He hurt me," she whispered so quietly she wasn't sure Lauren could hear, but watching him with Dad, seeing how he's built this whole life dedicated to saving others, I don't know if I'm more angry that he left or proud of what he became. "Because he did." Lauren's response was interrupted by a knock. Nathan stood in the doorway, his white coat back on, looking apologetic. "Sorry to interrupt dinner," he said, "but I thought you should know. All of Robert's latest tests came back excellent. If things continue this way, he could be home by the end of the week." The news should have brought only relief. Instead, Emma felt an unexpected pang. The end of the week. The end of this strange liminal space where past and present had collided, where old wounds and new healing had blurred together like watercolors. "That's wonderful," Lauren said, filling the silence. "We should celebrate. Maybe dinner. All of us." The invitation hung in the air like a challenge. Emma found herself holding her breath, watching Nathan's reaction. "I'd like that," he said softly, his eyes finding Emma's. "If everyone agrees." The moment stretched, taut with possibility. Emma thought about choices, the ones made for us, the ones we make ourselves, and the ones that feel less like choices and more like gravity, pulling us inexorably toward what we've been trying to outrun. The restaurant Lauren had chosen for Robert's celebration dinner was an intimate Italian place in the South End, its brick walls lined with vintage photographs of Boston. Emma arrived early, watching the evening crowds pass by through the window while fingering the stem of her water glass. She'd changed 3 times before settling on a deep blue dress that made her feel both confident and vulnerable. Much like her current state of mind. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lauren, stuck in traffic with Mom and Dad. "Start without us?" Before Emma could reply, Nathan appeared at the table. He'd traded his surgical scrubs for charcoal slacks and a light blue button-down that brought out the warmth in his eyes. 20 years ago, he'd worn mostly faded jeans and medical school sweatshirts. The man before her now carried himself with an ease that came from knowing exactly who he was. "The others are running late," Emma said, putting down her phone. "I know." Nathan slid into the chair across from her. "Lauren texted me too. Rather convenient timing, wouldn't you say?" Emma groaned. "She's not exactly subtle. She never was." He smiled, and for a moment they were co-conspirators again, sharing the familiar exasperation of dealing with her well-meaning but meddlesome sister. The waiter appeared with menus and a wine list. Nathan glanced at Emma, a question in his eyes. "Still prefer red?" "You remember that?" "I remember everything." He said it simply, without drama, but the words settled heavy in Emma's chest. They ordered a bottle of Chianti, and silence fell between them. Through the window, Emma watched, a young couple walking hand in hand, leaning into each other against the evening chill. Had she and Nathan ever been that carefree? "I went by the old dorm yesterday," Nathan said suddenly, "after my rounds. Funny how small it looks now." Prescott Hall. Emma pictured the red brick building where they'd spent countless hours studying, dreaming, planning a future that never came to be. "Why did you go there?" "Honestly, I'm not sure." He traced a pattern on the tablecloth. "Maybe because it was the last place where everything made sense, Before the diagnosis, before you decided to face death alone. The wine arrived, and Nathan waited until the waiter had poured and departed before responding. I wasn't alone. Your parents were not the same as having me there. Emma took a sip of wine, letting its warmth steady her. Do you know what makes me angriest? Not that you left, not even that you lied. It's that you took away my choice. You decided what I could handle, what I deserved to know. You're right. Nathan's voice was quiet but firm. I was wrong. I thought I was being noble, protecting you. But I was really protecting myself. The thought of you seeing me that way, weak, sick, possibly dying, it terrified me more than the disease itself. Why? Because you'd always looked at me like I could do anything, like I was invincible. He met her eyes. The day I got the diagnosis, do you know what I thought about? Not dying, not the pain. I thought about the way you looked at me and how I couldn't bear to see that change to pity. Emma's hand tightened around her wineglass. So instead, you let me look at you with hurt, with betrayal, with anger. Better angry than broken. Nathan's smile was sad. At least that's what I told myself at 3 a.m. in the hospital when the treatments made me so sick I couldn't remember my own name. I'd think about you at Harvard building your future, and it gave me strength. Even if you hated me, you were living your dreams. I didn't hate you. Emma's voice cracked slightly. I tried to. God knows it would have been easier, but I couldn't stop loving you. And that made me so angry I could barely breathe sometimes. The admission hung between them, heavy with 2 decades of unspoken truth. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, casting warm pools of light on the sidewalk. And now? Nathan asked softly. Before Emma could answer, her phone lit up with another text. She read it and laughed, the sound somewhere between amusement and disbelief. Lauren says Dad's not feeling up to dinner after all. They're heading home. She's so sorry for the last-minute change of plans. Of course she is. Nathan's eyes crinkled with humor. Your father's been doing laps around the cardiac ward for 3 days, but suddenly he's too tired for dinner. They're not exactly master strategists. Emma shook her head, then made a decision. Well, since we're here, and there's wine, we could stay, Nathan finished. Talk like adults. Are we adults? Most days. He lifted his glass. Although sitting here with you, I feel 22 again, terrified and exhilarated all at once. Emma studied him over the rim of her glass. You're not the only one who remembers everything. You know, I remember the way you used to fall asleep over your anatomy textbooks, how you'd quiz me on business terms while we made dinner. The sound of your laugh when you tried to teach me accounting basics, he finished, and failed miserably. You were a terrible student. I had a very distracting teacher. The easy banter felt both foreign and familiar, like speaking a language she'd once been fluent in. Emma realized she was smiling, really smiling for the first time in days. We should order, she said, picking up her menu, unless you're still surviving on hospital coffee and power bars. Hey, I'll have you know I've evolved. Now it's artisanal coffee and protein bars. They laughed together, and Emma felt something shift, like a key turning in a long rusted lock. The past was still there, its weight substantial between them. But maybe, just maybe, it could become a foundation instead of a wall. The waiter returned and they ordered, Nathan remembering her preference for linguine with clam sauce, Emma noting that he still avoided mushrooms. Small details that had somehow survived 20 years of silence, like seeds waiting for the right season to bloom. The morning after their dinner, Emma sat in her father's study, helping him organize the medications Nathan had prescribed for his recovery. The familiar room, with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and worn leather armchair, felt different now, as if the hospital's clinical atmosphere had followed them home, transforming this sanctuary into a reminder of recent vulnerabilities. You got in late last night, Robert commented, watching as she arranged pill bottles by schedule. His tone was carefully neutral, but his eyes held that knowing look she'd known since childhood. The dinner ran long. Emma focused on the labels, avoiding his gaze. We had a lot to talk about. 20 years' worth, I'd imagine. Robert picked up the St. Luke medallion from his desk, turning it over in his hands. Nathan called this morning, asked about my sleep quality, appetite, the usual medical questions. Then he mentioned something interesting. Emma stilled. Oh? He's giving a lecture series at Harvard Medical School next month on his innovative cardiac procedures. Robert set down the medallion. Apparently he's invited you to attend. Dad, he said you expressed interest in understanding more about what happened. Both times. Robert's voice softened. Both surgeries. Emma abandoned the pretense of organizing medications. We talked about his illness last night, really talked about it. He showed me his old medical files on his phone, charts, treatment protocols, survival rates. It was... She trailed off, remembering Nathan's face as he walked her through those sterile documents that had changed all their lives. Difficult? Enlightening. Emma sank into the armchair across from her father. He kept a journal during his treatment, reading parts of it. Dad, he was so young, so scared. But even then, every entry mentioned his worry about how his choices were affecting others. You, Mom, me. Robert nodded slowly. That sounds like Nathan, always carrying the weight of everyone else's world on his shoulders. He showed me the entry from the day you visited him at Mayo. Emma's voice caught. He wrote that seeing you and Mom there made him feel human again, not just a collection of symptoms and statistics. But he also wrote that if I had been there, he wouldn't have had the strength to keep fighting. He would have given up the experimental treatment, chosen comfort care, just to spare me the pain of watching him suffer. And now? Having learned all this, how do you feel? Emma stood, moving to the window that overlooked their backyard. The old oak tree where Nathan had once built her a reading nook still stood strong, its branches reaching toward the morning. Son, I feel everything. Anger that he didn't trust me to be strong enough. Grief for that terrified young man in the hospital bed. Pride in the doctor he became because of it all. And something else. She pressed her hand against the cool glass. Something that feels dangerously like forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't dangerous, sunshine. It's liberating. Is it? Emma turned to face her father. Because ever since last night, since really understanding why he left, I can't stop thinking about what might have been, and what might still be. A knock at the front door interrupted them. Through the study's window, Emma caught a glimpse of Nathan on the porch, medical bag in hand. He'd mentioned during dinner that he'd be stopping by for Dad's first home checkup, but seeing him here, in the morning light of her childhood home, made her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with cardiac concerns. Right on time, Robert said, his eyes twinkling. Always was punctual, that boy. Dad, please don't what, meddle? Too late for that warning, don't you think? Your mother and I have been meddling in your lives for 20 years. He stood carefully, one hand pressing against his chest. We meddled when we helped pay for his treatment. We meddled when we kept his secret. And we're meddling now, because sometimes love needs a little push. The doorbell rang again, and Emma heard her mother's footsteps in the hallway, followed by the murmur of greeting. Nathan's voice drifted through the house, professional but warm, asking Patricia about Robert's sleep patterns. You should go. Let them in, Robert said. Doctor's orders. Emma smoothed her skirt, suddenly conscious of her casual Saturday morning attire. This doesn't mean anything. He's just here as your doctor. Of course. Robert picked up the St. Luke medallion. Again, though you might want to tell him that his medical bag is open, and I can see the coffee cups from that little place you both used to love near Harvard Square. Emma's breath caught. La Luna Cafe, where they'd spent countless mornings planning their future over cappuccinos and croissants. They'd mentioned it last night, reminiscing about college days, but she hadn't expected. 2 cups, Robert added pointedly, still warm from the look of the steam. Before Emma could respond, Nathan appeared in the study doorway, looking, somehow both professional and endearingly uncertain. He held 2 coffee cups from La Luna, and the familiar logo sent a wave of memories washing over her. "I thought," he said quietly, "since we talked about missing their hazelnut blend last night." Emma moved forward to take one of the cups, their fingers brushing in the exchange. The coffee's aroma carried her back 20 years, to early morning, study sessions, to dreams shared over ceramic mugs, to a love that had been strong enough to break both their hearts in the name of protection. "Well," Robert said, settling back in his chair with poorly concealed satisfaction, "shall we begin my checkup? Though I have to say, I'm feeling better already." Through the window, the morning sun caught the St. Luke medallion on Robert's desk, sending ribbons of light dancing across the study's walls. Emma watched the patterns shift and change like the ways love could transform, from passionate youth to painful sacrifice, from decades of silence to quiet gestures of remembrance, delivered in coffee cups still warm with possibility. The Harvard Medical School amphitheater buzzed with anticipation. Emma sat in the back row, watching medical students file in with their laptops and coffee cups, their eager faces reminding her of Nathan at 22. She'd attended countless corporate presentations, but this felt different, more personal, more consequential. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. "How's the brilliant Dr. Sullivan doing?" Emma typed back, "Haven't seen him yet, just here to learn about the procedure that saved Dad." "Sure you are," Lauren responded. "That's why you're wearing your power suit and spent an hour on your hair." Before Emma could defend herself, Nathan appeared at the podium. He looked completely in his element, confident, passionate, ready to share the knowledge that had come. At such a high personal cost, their eyes met across the crowded room, and he smiled slightly before beginning his presentation. 20 years ago, he started, I was a patient in this very hospital." Emma found herself holding her breath as Nathan described his own diagnosis, the experimental treatment at Mayo Clinic, and how that experience shaped his approach to cardiac medicine. He never mentioned her directly, but when he spoke about the sacrifices made by loved ones, his eyes flickered to where she sat. The medical terminology washed over her. Arterial grafts, minimally invasive techniques, recovery protocols. But what caught her attention were the human elements he wove through the technical details, stories of patients, their fears, their hopes, their families. She recognized her father's case study, presented anonymously, but filled with personal insights that only Nathan could have observed. After the lecture, Emma waited as students crowded around Nathan with questions. She studied the ease with which he answered them, the way he made complex procedures sound achievable, how he encouraged their curiosity while tempering it with reality. Impressed, a voice beside her made her turn. Dr. Reeves stood there, looking amused. "He's good at this," Emma admitted. "The best. That's why we're offering him the department chair position." Dr. Reeves watched Nathan demonstrate a technique with his hands. Of course, that would mean permanently relocating to Boston. Emma's heart skipped. Is he considering it? That depends. Dr. Reeves gave her a knowing look. On several factors, I imagine. The students finally dispersed, leaving Nathan gathering his materials at the podium. Emma approached slowly, her heels clicking against the amphitheater steps. "Your father would have enjoyed this," Nathan said without looking up. "He always said I had a teacher's soul." "Dad says that about anyone who can explain things patiently." Emma reached the podium. "You never told me about the department chair offer." Nathan's hands stilled on his papers. "Andrea mentioned it. She might have let it slip." Emma leaned against the podium. It's a prestigious position. It is. He finally met her eyes. It's also complicated. Because of me. Because of us. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture that still made her heart twist. Emma, these past few weeks, since your father's surgery, I've been careful, professional, trying to respect boundaries while hoping what? Hoping I haven't lost my chance. Again. He stepped closer. The position is perfect. The research opportunities, the teaching, everything I've worked for. But I won't take it if my being here makes things difficult for you. Emma thought about the past weeks. Coffee cups from La Luna appearing on her desk at work, long conversations during her father's checkups, text messages about medical journals that somehow turned into discussions about life, dreams, regrets. She thought about forgiveness and how it felt less like surrender and more like strength. I have a confession, she said. I didn't come today just to learn about cardiac procedures. No. She reached into her bag, pulling out a worn leather journal. I found this last night cleaning out my old room at Dad's house. It's from college. She opened it to a marked page. This entry is from the day after you left. I wrote that I would never love anyone the way I loved you, that it wasn't just your presence I would miss, but the future we had planned, all those dreams we whispered about over coffee and anatomy flashcards. Nathan's breath caught. Emma, I was right, she continued. I never did love anyone else that way, because that kind of love, it grows with you, changes you, even when it hurts, even when it ends. She closed the journal. Or maybe especially when it doesn't really end at all. The empty amphitheater seemed to hold its breath. Through the windows, the late afternoon sun painted Harvard Yard in shades of gold, just as it had 20 years ago when they were young and untested by life's harder lessons. Take the position, Emma said softly. Boston needs doctors like you, and maybe, she smiled, echoing his words from weeks ago, maybe some bonds never break. They just need time to heal. Nathan reached out, his fingers brushing her hand where it rested on the journal. The touch was light, tentative, but it carried the weight of decades, of choices made and unmade, of pain endured and wisdom gained, of love lost and found again in unexpected ways. Coffee? He asked. La Luna's still open. Lauren will be insufferable when she finds out. Your whole family will be insufferable. His smile held both humor and hope. But they've earned it, don't you think? Emma thought of her father's knowing looks, her mother's careful orchestrations, Lauren's unsubtle matchmaking. She thought of the St. Luke medallion that had witnessed both Nathan's darkest days and his greatest triumph in the operating room. Yes, she said, taking his hand properly. I suppose they have. As they walked out of the amphitheater together, their shadows merged on the polished floor, not erasing the past, but creating something new from its lessons. Something that felt less like an ending restored and more like a beginning earned, one careful step at a time. 3 months after Robert's surgery, the Carter family gathered in their backyard for Sunday dinner. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of Patricia's herb garden and the promise of changing seasons. Robert, now fully recovered, stood at the grill, arguing good-naturedly with Lauren about the proper way to cook steaks, while Patricia arranged place settings on the patio table with teacher-like precision. Emma watched from the kitchen window as she finished the salad, taking in the familiar scene, made new by time and circumstance. Nathan was due to arrive any minute, no longer as Robert's doctor, but as a guest, as something more. The sound of the doorbell mixed with Lauren's laughter from outside. Emma dried her hands, catching her reflection in the window. She looked different somehow, softer around the edges, but stronger at the core. Nathan stood on the porch holding a bottle of wine and a manila envelope. He'd changed from his hospital, clothes into jeans and a navy sweater that reminded her of college days, but his smile held the confidence of the man he'd become. "Sorry I'm late," he said, stepping inside. "Had to pick up something important." He held up the envelope. The official offer from Harvard, Department Chair of Cardiothoracic Surgery, starting next semester. Emma's heart leapt. "You're accepting?" "Already did." He set down the wine but kept hold of the envelope. "There's something else in here too. The deed to a small house in Cambridge, walking distance to both the hospital and that coffee shop. We can't seem to stay away from." "Nathan, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "Just telling you that I'm here, really here. Not running, not hiding, not protecting anyone but myself from being honest about what I want." Emma took the envelope, running her fingers along its edge. "And what do you want?" "To build something new, something that honors the past without being trapped by it." He stepped closer. "I spent 20 years saving other people's hearts. Maybe it's time I took care of my own." Through the window, Emma could see her family gathering around the patio table. Lauren was gesturing animatedly, probably retelling the story of her matchmaking triumph at the hospital. Robert sat in his favorite chair, the St. Luke medallion, catching the evening light where it hung from a new chain around his neck, a gift from Nathan to mark his full recovery. "Do you remember," Emma said, "that night in college when we stayed up planning our future? We sat on the roof of Prescott Hall, and you mapped out constellations while I drafted business strategies on napkins." "Of course. You said we were writing our story in the stars." "We were so sure then, about everything." She set the envelope down on the counter. "Life turned out to be more complicated than either of us imagined." It did. Nathan's voice was soft. "But maybe that's what makes it valuable. We're not those kids anymore, Emma. We're people who've lived and lost and learned. People who understand that love isn't just about grand gestures and perfect moments." "What is it about then?" "Choice," he said simply. "Choosing to be honest, even when it's hard. Choosing to trust even after being hurt. Choosing to try again, even knowing that nothing is guaranteed." From the backyard, Robert's voice called out, "Are you two coming? These stakes won't wait forever." Emma smiled, hearing the barely concealed hope in her father's tone. "They're never going to stop watching us, you know, making sure we don't mess this up again." "Good." Nathan reached for her hand. "We could use a few guardian angels." They stepped out into the golden evening light together. The patio was set with familiar dishes: Patricia's roasted vegetables, Lauren's artisan bread, the wine Nathan had brought from a vineyard they'd once talked about visiting. But it was more than just a family dinner. It was a testament to resilience, to the way love could evolve and heal and strengthen over time. Robert stood as they approached, raising his glass. The motion pulled slightly at his surgery scar, but his smile was bright and sure. "To second chances," he said, "and to the people brave enough to take them." Emma felt Nathan's hand tighten around hers as they sat down, their shoulders touching. Through the trees, the first stars of evening were appearing, writing new constellations in the darkening sky. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, from passionate young love through heartbreak and silence, from unexpected reunion to careful rebuilding. Looking around the table at her family, at Robert's knowing smile, Patricia's gentle grace, Lauren's barely contained excitement, Emma realized that some stories don't end where you expect them to. Sometimes they spiral forward, gathering wisdom from every turn, until you find yourself exactly where you need to be. "Second chances," she echoed, raising her own glass. The crystal caught the light, sending prisms dancing across the table, like scattered pieces of the past coming together in a new pattern. Nathan leaned close, his voice for her alone. "Thank you for being brave enough to try again." Emma turned to meet his eyes, seeing in them all the possibilities that lay ahead. Mornings over coffee, evening walks along the Charles River, quiet moments between surgeries and board meetings. A future built not on youthful dreams, but on hard-won understanding. "Thank you," she whispered back, "for coming home." Above them, the stars continued their ancient dance, witnesses to endings and beginnings, to hearts that break and heal and grow stronger at the broken places. And in a backyard in Boston, surrounded by the love that had saved them both in different ways, Emma and Nathan began again, not as the people they had been, but as the people they had become, choosing each other with eyes wide open and hearts ready to write a new story, one careful heartbeat at a time. The end. That was a beautiful story, wasn't it? I hope you enjoyed it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your collaboration is very important to me.